And like you said, like, I think the best example is like, oh, what a pretty winery. You walk in there and you're looking at it going, oh, this is lovely looking inside. But like, yeah, like the person who knows what they're looking for is going to be looking for something completely different. And I think that's the thing that is like people just don't consider.
Well, I'll give you the best example. I'll give you the best example. Grapevine leaves are not supposed to turn red. And yet when you see people come out to visit wine country, what do they want to take pictures with in the fall? I want to go take pictures with all the vines. Oh, look, it's turning colors in the season. No, that's red blotch, or that's some other disease, And so it's just hilarious to me, like especially and when I see other real estate people that have their photographers take pictures of all of the red leaves in the fall, and that's what they use for their feature image on their wine country estate that they're selling. I just go, oh man, this maybe not what you should be selling.
Well, welcome everybody back to the Barrels and Roots podcast. I'm your host, Sean Trace, and I have a really interesting guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mike Hansen. I am the founder of the Hansen Vineyard and Winery team, which is a team under the Sotheby's International Realty umbrella. We are real estate brokers, but we specifically service the vineyard and winery industry. And we occupy kind of a space in the transactional area that is missing in terms of there's your big M&A firms, there's kind of your normal realtors. We're specialized advisors that not only have experience in the wine industry, but actively participate in it. The team is made up of myself and my father, who's a 40-year veteran winemaker and winery GM in the industry, and I grow 14 acres of chard. So we're half in, half out of the business, but we act as service advisors and partners really for the strategy side of vineyard and winery sales.
That's awesome, man. And it's awesome because you guys are, like you say, you're in it. But it leads so many questions because like you've built an intersection, a career right at the intersection of wine and real estate. How did that path even begin for you? Like that's my biggest question.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it wasn't a straight line, that's for sure. So
Right?
I didn't start doing real estate until I had a full blown corporate career in the health and wellness space. My my wife at one point had decided she was going to get her real estate license and never finished. So we had all of the books lying around at my house. And I was like, well, I'm doing this corporate career and I'm doing fine. We were both doing great, but I'm working a lot. Let me try and see if I can, do a little bit of real estate on the side. Maybe it turns into something, maybe it doesn't. And so I got my real estate license. This was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I immediately sold a couple homes. We bought an investment property. Had a couple of friends that I was working with that bought houses, and it really quickly started turning into potentially more than a side hustle. And then at the time, I started touring my dad's company, and he was working with a large wine brand based out of Europe. And I started touring them at a couple of vineyard properties. And I grew up around vineyards, and I grew up around wineries, and whole life had kind of, and my whole professional career had kind of tried to avoid the wine industry. And then I find myself out there kicking dirt with these guys, looking at these different properties, and going, "Dang, this is really fun. I'm actually really enjoying this." And it so happened that one of the guys who had a couple of these properties listed, um, I brought a couple pro formas. I was fresh off my master's in business. I made all of these, projections and analyses, and I was like, look what you could do with these properties. And I was super, bright eyed and bushy tailed about it. And he saw those projections, and he's like, hey, man, these are really good, You should come work on my team. And so I ended up joining Crew Land Company, worked with Crew Land Company for a couple of years, and Dave Carcier over there, who's a great guy. And yeah, we had a ton of work, and it was a really bad part of the cycle, which we're kind of still in, but it was great. And I decided when I started working with Dave that that would be the time where I transitioned away from kind of my corporate career and went full dive into the real estate. So that was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And so, we're kind of building out in the open in front of everybody, but I believe there's a lot of space in this niche that hasn't generally provided a lot of value back to the industry. And so that's our goal.
It's interesting too, because I think when people one of the things that I very much believe is that people don't understand all of the stuff that goes into the wine industry. They do not understand all of the parts and all of the pieces that are making it up. And one of the things I think that is just um definitely an area that people don't understand is the land. And like, how important where you're planting these vineyards are and like what goes into it and also the value of it. And that's one of the things too, like I was so curious about as the property values have skyrocketed, how that affects the prices of wine and things like that,
Mhm.
because it's so interesting. And Napa and Sonoma have gotten really expensive, and it's
Yeah.
like, how does that affect the overall industry?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's really a multifaceted answer because if you're seeing property values kind of blow up, there might be a couple of contributing factors to that. Number one being inflation, and
Right.
property
Right.
values. Property has largely been a hedge against inflation because it'll sort of match that same appreciation rate as the rate of inflation. So if we're talking about nominal versus, net, then there's a conversation to be had there. But what it really does is it adds fuel to the fire because as part of a strategy, you might see if a property value increases, just kind of like what people do with these renovate and refinance, you might see lines of credit be pulled off. You might see these lines of credit be re-injected as either marketing capital or as production capital or acquisition capital. So it really depends on the kind of size of the landowner. But what I would say is that most people aren't just sitting there going, wow, my property's gone up a lot in value. Great. That's not the case. They're leveraging it. They're using it. They might be pulling lines of credit off of it. They might be using it for redevelopment. So, in kind of an indirect way, it adds fuel to the fire that was this premiumization. And I think it really did contribute to some of the overinvestment and the over leveraging that we saw really in the 2021, 2022 period when we had really low interest rates and all of the property values were up and there was a lot of excess capital injected into the system. And we saw a lot of people take advantage of that. And I think now we're at the double compounding negative side of people taking that leverage and going, ooh, cheap money. Let's refinance. Let's take advantage of our high property value. But then you also saw the demand falsely propped up through the pandemic and the capital that was injected to the buyer, to the end user. And I think we saw an unusual jump in wine sales and that sort of thing. I mean, the trend, if you subtract kind of the COVID years, the trend was largely negative in consumption. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely affects the total economy of the system. Um, and inside of that also, labor plays a big part of it. And as we see prices inflate, we see sort of a match of labor going up, and that's a direct cost line item into your final product. And so, really, it's kind of a symptom of a larger inflationary and kind of economic pattern that really attributed towards increasing costs for the final product. So great question. Long answer to really what's a multifaceted question. Yeah.
It's an interesting and it's a great answer because, it's like nothing's ever simple. And, the direction companies go, the direction an industry goes is definitely one of those. But, like, for someone who loves wine but doesn't understand the business side, what actually goes into owning a vineyard, you know? I mean, that's something that I think people don't understand as well.
Yeah. I try to talk about this a fair amount on my socials. There are really any like annual crop is really interesting because you have revenue at one part of the year. Unless you have an unusual lease structure, which would be like a monthly lease structure or something, you're getting paid only at harvest. And so you're putting in all of these incremental investments into a product that is in the future. And so inherently there's this risk where you're putting up money all throughout the year up until the end of the year, and then you harvest and then you get your revenue, hopefully. And there are natural disasters that might preclude you from your revenue. There are just the regular industry patterns. You might have lost your contract. There's a lot of risk, and it's farming. So the vines wake up, you got to do stuff. Once the vines start waking up as a result of the change in the weather, it's time to get rolling, and they don't care whether or not you have a contract or not. And so it's time to farm, and there are a lot of different aspects. If you want, I can kind of explain the cycle of the work. But it's
That's actually be really interesting. What is some of the cycle of the work?
Yeah, really. So you actually want to start at the immediately after harvest, because after
Yep.
harvest the vines aren't yet fully dormant, and so I really think of the year as after harvest to the next harvest, because there are treatments that you do pre dormancy. You might inject some fertilizer into the system, or you might compost just to try and get some nitrogen to the roots, so that when the plants wake up after the dormancy period, they have some available energy to start, doing foliar growth, or pushing wood growth. So you're playing this game where you're matching where the vine's at with the treatment of it, and you're kind of trying to hedge against certain negative outcomes that could happen, right? So after harvest, you maybe inject some type of fertilizer, maybe you don't. Then you go into the dormancy period. Towards the end of the dormancy period, you prune, right? And when you prune, there's also a bunch of stuff that you got to do with the wires, right? So if you have trellising and that sort of thing, then you got to move the wires up and down. If there's any irrigation issues, you got to fix those. There's the whole water side of it. Maybe you shut off your water because there's freezing temperatures in your area and you need to protect your irrigation system. Maybe you don't. So you're
Hmm.
also kind of taking care of the circulatory system of your vineyard, which is the irrigation. And then after you prune, we see that process of bud break, which is where you start to see the little buds on if you've pruned down to 2 or 3 buds on each cane, then you start to see the buds kind of pressurize a little bit, and then they pop open. You see the first leaves. That's a really exciting kind of time. Bud break is here. It's beginning of spring. Then we'll see shoots get up to about 6 inches. Once we have 6 inches, you'll go through and you'll do your first spray, which would be kind of a copper based spray. Usually, it depends on what style you farm. This is kind of conventional farming. So you go through and spray with like some copper sulfide or something, and that's to prevent kind of longer term fungal issues that may occur. And all of this is location dependent, weather dependent. What you have in your particular area for challenges that are presented to you by nature. um, Once you get to a maybe second wire in height, you got to go through and you got a sucker, which is all of the little shoots coming out either from the rootstock that are stealing energy from the plant that you want to get up into the canopy. You got to go through, you got to sucker those out. So you're going to go and trim all that, and you'll strip away some of these like old dormant vines that might be shooting up halfway up the rootstock or whatever, or halfway up the cordon. And so you go through, you clear all that out, get your vine, so directing its energy to the leaves in the area where you want it. That's when you probably start to go through and have a normal spray program if you're doing conventional farming, where you're applying sulfur to prevent things like powdery mildew and other stuff that could damage it. Then you got bloom will come in that period, May, June, somewhere in there. With flowers open, vines are self-pollinating. So the flowers open, the vine will pollinate itself, and then you have fruit set. If you get a frost during this period of time, you could be in trouble with what's called with fruit set, which would be pretty much how much fruit you're going to have at the end of the year in terms of cluster count. Um, then, as it's getting up, you start to play this game of how many leaves do I want per cluster? How many leaves does it take to ripen whatever I'm ripening? And there are, different. There's different amounts of leaves based on leaf size, foliar area that could ripen a cluster. So if you have a cluster of Chardonnay versus a cluster of, Cabernet Franc, it's going to be different. What the leaf ratio, the area ratio of the leaf area versus how much you need to ripen that. You go through your season, you ripen your fruit, you irrigate if you have to. Then you get to harvest, and there's some spraying in between there, and you may do some leaf pulling to clear the fruit zone so that there's less chance of mold. And at that point, you're really battling against mold, powdery mildew. You might fight against larger pests like deer or wasps will go after your grapes, or birds. So then you might net. So it's really this game where once you get through the major parts, bud break, you don't want frost. You got your wind fans going, you're protecting that. Bloom, you don't want frost. You're trying to protect against that as well. You don't want a big rain during bloom. There's nothing you can do about that. And then it's just fighting the elements and trying to mitigate any harsh stuff. And then you get back to harvest. And harvest is, okay, we want the right physiological markers. We want the right sugar. We want the right development of acids and tannins. We want, the kind of perfect conditions to pick those grapes. And then hopefully it's not too hot and we can get a pick window where we can pick the grapes at their exactly where we want them. If it's screaming hot, we got a very small window. If we got a nice temperate end of season, we don't have to rush to pick all of our grapes. And then the cycle repeats. And I think that's about as good as I could do.
That's pretty amazing, because honestly, that's the first time in my entire on Barrels of Roots that I've had someone explain that cycle, and it's fascinating to me. And I don't even know how I didn't ask that before now. So when you said, "Yeah, maybe I could share it," I was like, "Hell yeah," because I haven't heard it yet. That's awesome, man.
Yeah,
Really appreciate
yeah.
that. And it's interesting
And
too. Go ahead. Go
you
ahead.
might do a couple other things. You might mow inside of there, and there's weed management. You might turn the dirt over, and there's a few other things that you might do, but for the most part, like that's the cycle.
I love that. I have another question for you too. I've got a bunch of questions after that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I saw a post the other day. I don't know where I saw it. It might have been one of the posts that you liked or something, because it was talking about how two wine vineyards sold recently, and both in the valley, and they were dramatically different prices. And I wanted to know what makes a vineyard or winery valuable, and what are buyers really looking at beyond just the wine? Because that's fascinating to me. Is it the ground? Is it the location?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with water. Water is a necessity. Water doesn't necessarily determine price. It will turn a deal on or off. It is a yes or no to the deal requirement. So, in terms of water, it's really hard to quantify because you must have it. This is agriculture. And so, if there's any scarcity of water resources on the property, there's likely not been a successful vineyard there. Or if it is, it's dry farmed, and, it's not a kind of commercial style vineyard. So water is a yes or no. And I'll get into buyer types in a second and how they look at different things, because certain buyer segments look at things differently. But then after that, it gets into quality of the vineyard, and how do you describe quality? And quality can be looked at in a couple of different ways, depending on the end user. Now, is this a quality commercial farmed thing where we're farming for yield and we're going to sell these grapes on the market, and we need to have, consistency, not necessarily the highest quality fruit, but what we're looking for is a lot of yield. So take like a 150-acre ranch in Russian River in Sonoma, where you're growing Chardonnay and you're pushing 5, 6, 7 tons to the acre, and you're selling all there's a model, the farming model, and you have to be able to hit yield and cost to yield and price per ton in order to cover the cost that you've spent throughout the year and make the margin that's required. And this is why I kind of say like different buyer types will attribute qualitative value differently. Like if it's a pension fund and they're going to farm it for yield and they're going to farm it for consistency, what they're going to want is they're going to want tonnage, they're going to want stable sales at a stable sale price, and they're going to want as much certainty in the model as they can have. And so what that looks like is a stable, healthy, medium age vineyard that yields well, has great water resources, a stable contract, and is in an area where the land value probably won't drop dramatically, right? That's one type of buyer, right? And so, you look at and that bucket also could be matched up with like larger vineyard land tracts, right?
Yeah.
80, 70, maybe in 50 acres and above, right? Right now, a producer, a winery, probably aren't looking at 100-acre vineyard, because there's so
Yeah.
much uncertainty in the demand cycle for the end buyer, for the wine drinker, that that's risky to take on that much fruit. Where are we going to sell it to? Who are we going to give to our excess to? So they don't want to necessarily pay for land that's not going to flow into their own bottles, for grapes that aren't going to flow into their own bottles. And then so then you look at a deal like the Markham deal, where you saw kind of a historically above average, like 400K per acre sale, and you get this big price tag. Well, who were the two buyers? Who were the two players, and what were they doing? And that deal between Dominus and Markham, achieved a price per acre that was dramatically higher than what True Body ended up selling for, which was 4 times higher. And so why did that happen? It was still an older vineyard, but what was it? It was a trade between two producers, right? And that's where you look at, okay, what's the buyer type? These are two of the highest end wineries in Napa Valley. They're making a trade, and that trade is largely going to reflect their statuses inside of the game, because that vineyard was meant for and had a purpose to go into the bottles. It was accounted for. It was like, no, this is vertical. This is going right into our bottles. Nobody else can have it. So the asset was a diamond, right? I'm not going to just farm this and sell it to everybody. This is going into my program, right? Versus True Body, which was a much larger land acreage, 140 acres planted. And that one was, this is a commercial play. We're going to farm this and we're going to sell this. Because who's going to put 140 acres worth of grapes into their program today in Napa Valley?
Right.
Nobody. So, maybe Duckhorn. But it's like, so you have this thing of who's buying it and what is the asset? What class is it going into? Is it an institutional sized asset? Is it an investment asset? Or is it a programmatic asset where we're actually going to take this and put it vertically into our wine bottles, and we're going to put that at the end of the day? Because you get economies of production, right? If you own the vineyard and it goes up all the way into your bottle, then you take margin at each step in the development process and in the production process. So, it's an interesting thing. There are, in general, some attributes of vineyards that will make them better than other vineyards. Soil types,
Like what?
micro soil
Soil type?
types,
That was what I was
micro,
thinking. Yeah.
yeah, microclimates. Your location plays a big part into it. Like, and really, it's the stresses that are imparted to a vineyard and how well suited to those stresses the varietal choice and the rootstock is.
Interesting.
So you have like Hillside Napa Valley Cab Franc, Hillside Napa Valley Cabernet. This stuff is struggling against a certain set of environmental challenges. And that's what produces tension inside of the vine, which then causes a
Yeah.
physiological response where you see these high concentration phenolics, high concentration of tannins, maybe smaller berry size because you're not able to hold so much water since all the water is draining off the hillside. It's kind of the same thing in Russian River where you see this really sandy soil. The prized soil is the Gold Ridge fine sandy loam, right? And what it
Yeah.
is it's really well draining. And
Mm,
and so you cannot, even if you irrigate it every day, you're not going to yield 5 tons to the acre. So you have
mm,
a concentrated berry. You have considering the fact that like the majority of all of the phenolics of a berry are held inside of the skin, right? It's not in the juice in the center. All of the tannins, all of the kind of complex aromatics are locked up inside of the cell walls of the actual skin. So if that's the case, less juice inside gets you a higher skin to juice ratio, which is going to be more
mm,
extraction, right? More concentration of flavors. So, these are the things, right? And if you're gonna that would be considered higher quality because you have a more concentrated end product, right? And so, if your marketing is so good that you don't need a more concentrated end product, then you may have a great selling wine that you can take price on and it might not matter, right? But if you want to talk about like winemaker nerds, like straight physiological betterness and more concentration of flavor, then you need to have a set of challenges that match the kind of physiological planting choices and varietals that you've made. Um, so, and this is where winemakers get super into it is it's like, okay, how did all of this nature interact with this plant and make the challenges that caused this particular expression of the fruit that end up in my glass and I smell that, right? That's where people really get hooked.
mhm. It's interesting too because, for you, you're not just a broker, you're also a grower. And like, how does that change the way you see deals and opportunities? Because people, like for me, like a lot of the stuff I don't get, but it's so interesting to me. But like for you as a grower, does that change the way you look at stuff?
It does, for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, I'm really quick to, just because I'm always looking in my vineyard for problems, I'm really quick to see problems in a vineyard. And that might be looked at as a bad thing, but personally, I think it's a good thing because if I were a seller, I would want somebody who understands the product. And if I were a buyer, I would want somebody who understands and has my back and protecting me if they see something, say something, right? So,
Hmm.
and then also like because I'm a grower and I understand the pathway of my grapes and the end, like I'm a part of the value chain. So like when I walk a site with somebody, whether on the buy side or the sell side, it's like, how is this fitting into your larger strategy? Or how is this fitting into your, buyer's larger strategy? And so I'm looking not just at the asset, but how does this play in the economics of the total wine game, you know? And so that's the way that I look at this stuff. It's integrated more into the wine business versus just like, oh, this is a nice vineyard, you know? I'm not looking at it
Right.
like
You're not looking for the view. You're not looking for the stuff that other people are. You're like, how does this, how does every last little bit affect the economic output of this property, I'm
and,
sure there
and
is a
and we
lot.
have to look at it. We have to look at it that way because the economic outlook, like, is the saleability, and I don't know if that's a word. It's the saleability of the asset. If there is no clear economic picture of where this fruit can go, who can use it, what contracts do we have, what contracts could we get, there is no sale.
Yeah.
That's where we're at in the market today. there has to be a crystal clear economic picture of where every grape is going to go, unless you have a magic producer buyer that's like, we'll take all the excess, no worries, you know. So the economics have to be totally clear on a site, otherwise, you know, it's going to be hard to sell
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you another one too, because, what's something that most people completely misunderstand about the economics of running a winery?
it. Well, there are a lot of things about wineries are highly variable. First of all, because almost every single winery was at one point started by somebody who loved wine and it was just a family project.
Yeah.
Like if you look at all of the wineries in Sonoma and Napa, you know, I would say probably at least 50% of them are just somebody's last name. And
Yeah.
it's because wine has always been sort of an individual passion that has then turned into a collective passion that then has turned into a business. Um, in terms of things that are overlooked, I think that the what I would say about that is like flashy stuff often looks like value and might not be if the underlying sort of um, build quality isn't there. For instance, if you have a cave system, everybody loves cave systems. Caves are beautiful. They're an awesome place to go. If you don't have temperature control in your cave, then your cave is largely no better than a warehouse. You know,
Mm,
for aging barrels. You know, if you're above 63 degrees, then you're not, you know, you don't have control of your malolactic fermentation. And
mm,
so, you know, you could be co-fermenting on accident. There's a lot of stuff that you might, you know, not be able to control. And so, you know, if you have a cave, that's great. If you don't have temperature control in your cave, it would be better for your wines and you'd have more control over your wines if you just put that thing in a temperature controlled warehouse.
mm.
So that, like, value can look a certain way and not be actually right for winemaking.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. What else? What else do people overlook? I think layouts of wineries sometimes is like you might drive up to a winery and be like, "Wow, this is beautiful," and then a winemaker will
Yeah.
drive up and be like, "Where do they truck the fruit in? This looks like a nightmare. What do you have to put it over there and then jump on a forklift and then bring it in where like the crush pad's way over there? How do you get the crushed grapes into your tank?" Like, so that's one thing that I think like just everyday people don't look for, but a winemaker is going to look for. And then even little things like slope drains, right? If you don't have a slope drain, then you're going to have to squeegee the entire, you know, fermentation floor every day. And so that's where you have to turn on like, okay, the actual work lens, like how does this place flow as a production facility? And is it actually, you know, if you're having to go and forklift up barrels to move them to the side to access your other barrels, like this is just labor hours. And
Yeah.
yeah, so the layout on the actual path of work in a winery, I think, is something that people don't always see. And because you've started all of these things as sort of family passion projects, it's so variable how a winery is laid out. Yeah.
The fact that the business side is there's just so much going on. And like you said, like I think the best example is like, oh, what a pretty winery. You walk in there and you're looking at it going, oh, this is lovely looking inside. But like, yeah, like the person who knows what they're looking for is going to be looking for something completely different. And I think that's the thing that is like people just don't consider.
Well, I'll give you the best example. I'll give you the best example.
Please, please.
Grapevine leaves are not supposed to turn red. And yet, when you see people come out to visit wine country, what do they want to take pictures with in the fall?
Red
I
wine,
want to go take
red
pictures with
vine.
all the vines. Oh, look, it's turning colors in the season. No, that's red blotch. or that's some other disease, and so it's just hilarious to me, like, especially, and when I see other real estate people that have their photographers take pictures of all of the red leaves in the fall, and that's what they use for their feature image on their wine country estate that they're selling. I just go, oh man, this maybe not what you should be selling.
Wow. Yeah, see, that's wild. Well, when someone is looking to buy a vineyard, what are the biggest mistakes they made except for buying places with red red leaves, man?
um, I think the biggest thing is that they don't understand the investment cycle, and they don't understand how clear they need the economics to be on the vineyard. Now, and this doesn't really happen anymore, quite frankly. Like, the lifestyle buyer is so much more financially oriented today that, like, I just sold
Yeah.
this ranch in Forestville at the end of last year, and the guy I was working with never owned a vineyard or anything like that, and he, kind of romanticized the wine industry, but, like, he needed to know who is the end buyer, what's the exact investment cycle, how much money can I expect out of this, what's the cushion. Like,
Yeah.
he was very sophisticated, and so I think, like, it used to be that you could just go and buy a vineyard estate on spec, and you'd find a buyer for your grapes, and it would all be hunky dory. That's not the case anymore. So I think the biggest mistake you could do is buy a vineyard with no contract. I think that's the with no plan. That would be a huge mistake, because you don't know, you might not be able to sell those grapes for years, and then you're just saddled with the investment of keeping it running and trying to figure out that. I would never buy that. That would be super sketch.
Well, on the flip side, when someone is selling, how do they know it's the right time to exit?
Yeah, timing is always rear view, so it's really tough. A lot of people are like, I don't want to sell right now. I'm going to wait for the bottom of the market. We don't know when the bottom of the market's going to be, and we're not going to know until 2 years after it happens. So, it's going to be challenging to try and time the market. I think, what if people are going to sell, a couple of things they should look for is, what is the what part of the age cycle are my vines in? How old are my vines? If you have 25, 30-year-old vines, it's the end of an economic life of kind of a vineyard. That doesn't mean that the grapes won't be good. It just means that your yield is going to be trending down. From an investment standpoint, people are going to look at that and say, that's old, right?
Mm.
Actually has nothing to do with quality. You can get great quality off of old vines. I mean, we see this everywhere with the old vines in craze that's going on. And, like, you can get great quality off of older vines. But from an investor's viewpoint, 30 years is kind of the economic life of a vine. 30 years. So, if you have a 30-year-old vineyard, you're going to have trouble selling that, unless you have a really cool contract, a really cool story around it, and it's going into some bottling that is spoken for. So, like, if you're going to try and sell your property today, you should attach a contract to it. Even if you buy the
Mhm.
grapes and you take the risk, there should be kind of a guarantee. And what some people are doing is they're putting a revenue guarantee into escrow. So basically, like, there's a holdout number that stays in escrow. Like, if you're promising the buyer that, hey, you'll be able to sell these grapes and get this amount of revenue, okay, hold that revenue in escrow until the end of the year. Hold, put it
Mm.
earmarked, that same amount of money earmarked, and hold it in escrow. And then if I can't actually sell all these grapes and make that money, I'll just keep it out of escrow versus those proceeds going to the seller. So that's where we're at in terms of creativity. We're having to do some really interesting stuff to just make a buyer feel safe enough to execute a purchase. So, like, I guess the best piece of advice is, if you're going to try and sell your property, know what challenges buyers are facing now, and know what they're trying to protect themselves against, and then make sure that you have a plan in place for those risks that are perceived in the market.
Mm. Makes a lot of sense, man. Well, something else that I was thinking about, because I am eternally curious, but if someone listening dreams about opening a vineyard one day, do you think it's first of all a good idea? And what do you want them to understand before they even think about it?
I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm not doom and gloom. I do believe that this is going to recover, and I think if somebody's going to own a vineyard, you know, number one, don't romanticize the farming aspect of it.
Yeah,
Farming is work and it is expense. And at the end of the day, if there's no revenue coming, then it's 100% expense. So know that. If you're going to romanticize something and you're going to dream something, make sure that that dream is shareable with people who will support it. So if you're going to have a dream to grow grapes and make wine, have a freaking awesome dream. You know, make it shareable. Bring people with you. You know, because that's where wine is successful. You know, it's when it builds community. It's when a lot of people get behind the vision. You have a shareable story. You have like everybody loves this word passion. I'm passionate about wine. It's fine to be passionate, but if you can't build a community with that passion and you can't sell your stuff at the end of the day, it's
right,
unsustainable. It is an unsustainable business. And so like I I think although we love to separate business and passion, be passionate about the success of your venture. You know, don't
right.
just do it because you love grapes and you love wine and you love farming, you know?
I think that's some of the best advice in any passion project. You gotta see, can you make money at it? I work with people doing content and YouTube, like, and at the end of the day, they have to see, can you make money doing this project, And if you can't, you've got to think about that really carefully because it can be quite dangerous if you are just dumping money and you have no hope of a return, you know? And so I think that one day at a time, you can get things figured out, but you gotta look at that path to making your cash back, man. So I love that. Well, where can people go to find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah. People can go to our new sparkly fresh website, which is sellingvineyards.com. You can get a lot of information on there. There's what stuff to learn. There's all sorts of maps and all the listings that are for sale in Napa and Sonoma, and tons of value on that website. You get a little bit of story about myself and my dad and our team. You can go follow our page, which is on Instagram, the HVW team, Hansen Vineyard Winery team, HVW team. Or you can follow me personally, Hansen_land. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So, you can find me on LinkedIn, connect with me there. And other than that, my phone number is all over the internet. Just give me a call.